Okay, we got a good one today. We are comparing the Shuttle AM and the LT. We're starting off with the LT, just riding at Galbraith Mountain today. Climbing the LT is fairly similar feeling to the AM. I'm in the low setting on like the suspension flip chip for both bikes. This bike definitely feels a bit more slacked out in that low setting, but doesn't seem to be a problem for getting up steep slopes and tough climbs. I feel like for how short the chainstays are on both of these bikes, they're very balanced climbers. That DW rear suspension, definitely more on the active side for both bikes versus being like a crazy anti-squat side, which is probably pretty ideal for an e-bike. But either way, both bikes seem to have pretty darn active suspension all the time. I switched to the Shreddas, so I'll have the Shredda on the front, the Schwalbe Shredda front tire on this bike, and then just the Continental stock tire on the rear since I don't have a 27.5 version. I've been pretty amazed how well that smaller diameter rear wheel clings to stuff on the way uphill. Like, it doesn't super seem to be as much of a traction problem as I would have thought. And this bike is just like immediately noticeably a softer bike that's just eating up a lot more on the climb and the descent. I'm just under 6 foot tall, and this large with a pretty good size reach on this bike feels right at home. I think the shorter chainstays on these bikes just make them feel a lot more agile and well-rounded. This bike, the LT, is just ridiculously agile for having 160 mil of rear travel, 170 up front. Yeah, like there was a moment right there coming around that route where the bike could have easily slipped, and this thing held. And I think that would only be better with a Shredda on the rear for the Northwest. Yeah, I've been impressed the kind of traction that 27.5 has had on the LT, because that's definitely like a slight point of concern for me. But you've got the extra weight on these bikes, and yeah, it just seems to be less of a factor for hang up. I guess when you think of it like on a non-powered bike, usually you're getting kind of torqued out. If you have a smaller wheel like the 29er, making it easier to kind of smooth out the trail in front of you. Whereas when you have the motor helping you, it's easier to not get that hung up feeling as bad. And then the Bosch motor system is just fantastic. I find that the Bosch is the best system I've ridden so far at giving you like really good low-end torque. So it feels a little bit more natural to me. Like to borrow a dirt bike term, you can kind of lug that electric motor, and some of the other systems, it seems like you gotta spin a higher cadence to get more power. And I think this motor also makes more power at a higher cadence. However, lugs really well. All right, dropping in. First with the LT. Yay! Super fun to jump this bike. It's got just like a light feeling, just trail feel to it. Yeah, I'll try bringing it through this trail, which can be a little tight feeling, even on the analog like Firebird. Yeah, this bike, it's easy to throw that rear end around, keep that in check. It just feels very playful. I've got a lot of friends who've given the advice of like, you might as well just go with the most power, the biggest suspension-wise e-bike that you can get your hands on, since you end up riding, more technical terrain, since it's easier to access out here. So, I don't know. This bike feels good. And you do for sure end up riding more double black terrain. Yee. A little harder to like feel confident right away on these tighter corners. Yeah, it's pretty easy to keep tabs on that rear end though. Also, this Orient Express trail is a little bit bumpier of a ride. It's a little bit more like technical. Oh, I don't need to get all wet right now. Technical of a trail for Galbraith. The speeds are pretty high, and as a result, the lines are a little bit tighter. One of the trails here that can put like a 170 millimeter fork to use. Yeah, easy to maintain speed in this flat spot with that motor. Super nice. You don't have to just be breathing through your eyeballs to hold speed through there. Super confident at speed. Very plush bike. That 27.5 rear tire does feel quite nicely planted right now. That corner is so scary. Man, yeah. Bike feels very confident and chargy through this one. I feel like this trail just comes at you quick, and I am just plowing the front end into stuff right now, just letting the bike kind of eat it. Still feel very able to pop the bike and kind of make those doubles that I would usually associate with like an analog bike. Super poppy. Yee. Woo. Very confident at speed. Got this bike in the low setting now, and it just feels hunkered down. Yee, new jump. And chargy, soft. My hands feel pretty fresh. Not the longest trail, but definitely can beat you up. Woo. Gotta throw a couple pedal strokes for that one. I have a hard time hitting this feature blind. I definitely got more of a sweat going on the downhill than the uphill. Oh, that's the e-bike life, isn't it? Oh, yep, basically didn't hit that great, and the bike did a good job of eating it. Good huck to flat test, because I kind of knuckled that little landing. So that descent, bike felt super stable and comfortable. Didn't really notice any slidiness with that 27.5 rear wheel. Even though that's not, the Continental is probably not the tire I'd even want to run. So the AM will have that advantage. But, oh man, it felt great. Very plush feeling bike. Very confident with that 38 up front. Just felt like I wasn't getting pushed around. It felt easy to kind of whip. I think it already feels easy to whip the rear end of this bike around, and I struggle doing that with the heavier e-bikes. So I feel like if I really got like a multi-month relationship with this bike, I could kind of just be tossing that rear wheel around. So I just bumped up to this other trail called Air Chair. Starts with a nice rock roll. Yeah, it's so amazing how easy I find it to pump this bike. I just really thought the longer travel bike would be more cumbersome, but man, this thing is pretty darn. From that first ride, I just keep saying this bike is so surprisingly light on its toes. Yeah, a lot of manipulating the bike through there, and it just doesn't feel like a chore on this bike. It's super fun. I feel like on paper, I don't want to like the mullet, but out here, feels great. Maybe just that extra bike weight just keeps things a little bit more even. Keeps that rear wheel from shooting out on you. All right, heading back down to the van with the LT. Just, man, I feel like the experiences with this bike just keep getting better and better. Yay! I love the playfulness, the liveliness. It kind of reminds me of what would that be? The Santa Cruz Bronson in e-bike form. But ultimately, it does just feel like the e-bike version of Firebird. Yeah, I feel like I'm slicing this bike around more than I should be for a longer travel, full power bike. Super fun. One of the commenters said I had to try this bike out, and he was 100% right. Oh wow, super nice feeling jumps through there. Really like the way this bike pops into the air. Really hitting the spot today. So curious how the AM is going to compare to this. Yay! All right, on to the Shuttle AM with the first test, the stairs test. And the Shuttle LT actually did really good on this. Honestly, somehow maybe better than this bike. But they both made it up. Also immediately noticing these brakes are not going to be as powerful as the 220 rotors with the Maven Silvers. Yeah, the way this bike pitches over immediately feels different, even on the climb. Also feels less powerful on like initial acceleration. That might be the wheel size difference. Tried clicking up a mode just to make sure I'm not missing anything with motor setup, but and the LT has like the race motor, and I honestly don't know off the top of my head what the difference is between the CX and the race. I thought it was like the top end mode, but certainly whatever's going on, this bike does feel a little bit less peppy on the motor front, and I wonder if that's the 29er being a little bit more leverage against that motor. Definitely rolls over that stuff really easily. It's kind of like a different flavor of the same thing. The front end definitely feels more firm and chattery, even climbing. Yeah, it's like for sure that 29er wants to pave out the trail a bit more, but then the shock gets stiffer, so much faster feeling than the LT. Yeah, quite a bit different feeling like pitching this bike over. I'm pretty surprised that LT with a fatter rear tire felt more compliant through there. All right, dropping in here. Just met some subscribers. Only 3,000 of you, and half of you are probably in Bellingham. Okay, this bike's feeling really good. That was super fun through there. Yeah, definitely a little bit different bike to lean over. I think just the geometry being just a hair less relaxed than the LT. But okay, yeah, a little harder to like tuck around those tight corners, surprisingly. LT might be a little bit more nimble, which is crazy, but this bike also very light on its toes. Continuing on towards Oriental. I feel perhaps more secure leaning it over on these corners. which is interesting. I don't know if that's just my longer relationship with this bike, or that's something to do with the 29er grip or the Shreddas, but interesting. Yeah, this thing can definitely, despite the lack of travel compared to the LT, this thing still loves to just punch through chunk. Yee. Oh man. Yeah, this has got a really nice, lively but secure quality on the downhill. I think that 29-inch wheel is just singing a little bit. Woo! Take the squirreliest line to not get face full of water through there. Yeah, I guess I do feel more secure on that rear wheel. I don't know if that's just the Shredda or the 29, but that's interesting. This bike does also feel super balanced. Yeah, when you open it up, man, I feel like it's eating the terrain like awkwardly well. Brakes are also stronger than I would have thought, transitioning from, take the inside line here, transitioning from the Mavens. Yay! Woo! Yeah, I do feel a sense of like tire security on this bike, so that's interesting. Okay, brakes felt a little bit weaker at the end there. Yeah, this is weird. It's like both these bikes are like two versions of the same recipe or something, even though the travel's quite a bit different. I feel like this one really likes to drive, and that LT felt super soft and more relaxed. This one's definitely sharper feeling geometry, but I don't know if it's just throwing these Shreddas on this bike, but this one definitely is liking to charge straight through the chunk as well. It's pretty addicting. Maybe a little bit lazier on the pop, which is interesting. It really popped nice on that second jump though. A lot of like rocks and weirdness on this trail right now, and oh my gosh, so fun. Oh, okay, this is kind of blowing my mind in a way. This bike is definitely charging more downhill than I would have expected. Really likes to hold like a straight line. Somehow feels perhaps less poppy and playful than the LT, which is kind of counterintuitive. I took that the exact same way as last time. Been a little squirrely on that stupid rock today. I feel like it's, yeah, just really confident in how it's holding its line. Which I guess I said about the LT too, but definitely a different flavor of that. Yeah, it's pretty interesting. It's like both bikes had the burly front tire. They've got the extra weight of the motor. They both just felt like crushers. Just definitely different flavors. I think if I was trying to just like chill and plow, I would go with the LT. This bike feels like a little bit more stable on the traction front, which is kind of interesting. And like it wants to hold a straighter line than the LT, which I would never have guessed, but that's what I'm feeling today. Good news is you clearly can't really go wrong with either bike. This bike's gonna have more rear tire traction. LT is gonna be softer and, from what I was feeling, poppier, which once again kind of counterintuitive, maybe down to the tire spec. I guess this bike had the advantage of like I had a warm-up lap too, but there were a couple sections where I ended up going straight on this bike because at the last second it just felt like a little too much work to change line. Whereas the LT, I felt like I could squirrel around stuff a little bit better. Starting off with the drop. This bike felt great with that transition. Might have felt smoother actually. Yeah, crazy. I don't think this bike's any easier to pop. Wouldn't have expected that, but could be down to that rear tire for sure. Yeah, it feels like it really likes driving through this terrain right now. I feel like I had to choke up a little bit through there though, speed-wise. And I love how they kept that LT like such a playful feeling bike still. That's so cool. My mind is kind of blown that both bikes feel so similar. It's just kind of like pick your travel, pick your desired rear wheel. Maybe throw some Mavens on this bike if you are looking to ride steeper terrain. Yeah, so I can try to answer any more specific questions in the comments, but definitely feels like two versions of the same flavor going between the AM and the LT. I think just having that weight and the DW link, shorter chain stays relatively, just combines to give you that pivot flavor. And I think the similar weights are what make these bikes feel so relatively similar. I do like the security of the rear wheel traction on this bike. I feel like I felt more comfortable ripping it around, but I am comparing a Shredda to a Continental Cryptotol, so that's not exactly a fair comparison. Yeah, I think if you just like stuck me with either one of these bikes, I'd be super stoked. But for my style of riding, probably go with the LT, get a smaller Shredda to put on that bike, and yeah. But it could be that 2.6 tire volume that makes that bike so soft. It's hard to say. But if I had to pick one at this point, I think that would be the move. Man, this thing is just, once again, just trucking through all that river rock. Really feeling confident. Yeah, probably a bigger video, but I've now compared the LT and the AM.